Grüß Gott und herzlich willkommen zu einer neuen Ausgabe von Weitblick. Hört ihre Schreie, so heißt ein brandaktueller Bericht des weltweiten päpstlichen Hilfswerks Kirche in Not. Das Thema: Christliche Frauen werden in den letzten Jahren gezielt von Islamisten entführt und zwangsverheiratet. Der Bericht deckt schwer zugängliche Fälle aus Ägypten, Syrien, dem Irak, Pakistan und Nigeria auf. Christinnen werden in diesen Ländern gezielt von Islamisten entführt, um die Familien der christlichen Minderheiten zu zerstören. Maßgeblich zum Kirche in Not-Bericht über dieses Unrecht beigetragen hat Professor Michael Clark von der Elliott School of International Affairs in Washington, D.C. Sie ist uns nun zugeschaltet. Welcome, Professor Clark.
Thank you, Andre.
How did your contribution to Hear Her Cries come about? Why did ACN approach you?
My career has been, my professional career has been primarily focused on international human rights and notably the rights of women. So I have worked extensively in the areas of combating human trafficking. But I've also worked in refugee resettlement, worked with asylum seekers, and worked with especially young girls who've experienced trauma in various upheavals in their lives, politically, for religious reasons, just a variety of factors. So, and the issue of religious freedom has always been deeply important to me. And I'm in the process of writing a book on the resettlement of the Soviet Jews in Israel right now and what has happened to them. So throughout my professional career, I became friends, colleagues, and then a professional associate with John Eibner of Christian Solidarity International, who's done a great deal of work also to help persecuted Christians around the world. And he knew that I had an ability to talk to young women who had gone through very difficult times and asked me if I would be willing to help him learn more firsthand about what is happening to Coptic women in Egypt. There had been, prior to the work I did, many anecdotal stories, a few serious investigative reportings. The BBC had done something, a variety of other newspapers, but really not very much. So I was able to travel to Egypt twice with the assistance of Nadia Ghali, a Coptic Christian activist who was instrumental also to the work that we did. She was my interpreter. She helped us facilitate all of the details of the trip in order to make contact with women who had returned from situations of abduction, forced marriage, forced conversion, or their families if the women had not returned. We also met with different human rights lawyers who represented these individuals in order to either help get the women back or gain some form of restitution following what had happened to them. And these visits resulted in 2 reports, which were then highlighted in 2 hearings by the U.S. Helsinki Commission in the U.S. Congress, chaired by Congressman Chris Smith, that gave considerable more visibility to the situation that was happening in Egypt.
What did your research say? Is this a relatively new phenomenon, or has this problem been around for decades and we didn't recognize it?
In the research I've done, the earliest documentation I can find is in the mid-70s, where religious freedom activists were able to find some instances of abduction. There were never any academic or research surrounding this, but certainly, and if it was in the 70s, I'm sure it was happening well before then as well. The use of women as in the war of attrition against religious minorities is unfortunately not a new phenomenon.
But with the rise of the Islamic State, has there a new urgency to this question?
I would say that that it has increased. What we are finding, what I have been able to find in my research, and others also would corroborate this, is that the attacks against young Coptic women have grown in number. There is evidence that these are organized and planned. These are not just random instances in an emotional outburst. They are very well organized. There are methods to them, and the lawyers who represent Copts indicate that the numbers of cases that come to them have grown, which means that the overall number has grown even more because a lot of people don't go to lawyers and don't report these cases officially for a variety of reasons.
So are you saying that there's a strategy by the Islamists to target Christian women to tear apart their families?
It not only tears apart the families, but because of the way Islamic law is structured, it is actually a war of attrition against the religious minorities. If a young Coptic woman is forcibly converted or deceptively converted and married, brought into an Islamic family, primarily through some kind of force, as in kidnappings or abductions or fraud, being presented with opportunities that don't exist, love, for example, and we can get back to that topic. If she then goes through a conversion process, it's impossible for her, once she's able to leave or the family has released her, to regain her Christian status. If you convert to Islam, you are not allowed to convert back to Christianity, even if you have originally started off as a Christian. If there are children, the children will always remain Muslim. And so one increasing target that we've been able to document is that the number of young mothers with children became significant. And one of the reasons I believe for that is, instead of just removing one person from the Christian fold, you're now removing the mother and the children, and therefore the potential children's children.
It's always problematic to talk in general terms about these cases. Can you tell us some specific cases you came across?
Well, I remember what stands out very much to me is the involvement of fathers of some of these young women who have become the greatest advocates for their daughters' release. One gentleman that I spoke with had received a telephone call, a very threatening telephone call, saying, "Watch out for your daughter. We are watching you." Of course, this terrified him. He was a professional man and working, supporting his family. And so he made very sure he took his daughter out of school. He kept her at home. He had left firm instructions for his wife to not let the daughter out of the home unaccompanied. About 2 or 3 weeks after this initial threat, the daughter asked the mother if she could go to the market. She just wanted to get out of the house, and the market was, from what I remember him telling me, about 250 meters away from the house. She went to the market and was never seen again. He received phone calls after that, and was able to speak to his daughter. He kept recordings of these messages, reported this to the police, had the phone numbers where the threatening calls had come from, but none of this was ever acted on. And and he had at the point of our conversation not been able to get any assistance from the authorities or had been able to actually see her doctor again. There are several instances of young women who are from broken homes and broken families. And what will happen is, as they become friends with neighbors and schoolmates, a young girl from a Muslim family will say, "Oh, my brother really likes you. You know, he'd like to meet you more." And this begins a relationship of friendship, which puts the young girl at ease, and she's able to have just relax and enjoy and feel that she's considered valuable and pretty and smart, and somebody likes her. And then this can lead to some form, this is in a few particular cases has led to entrapment, where she would be invited to the home of the girl who was her friend to be assaulted by a man. Once she is assaulted, that catapults the whole process into, a completely different area, because if you come from a conservative background, then once a young woman is assaulted, she is not considered honorable anymore. And then it becomes very difficult for her to go back, or she's assaulted and raped and forced into a marriage conversion. And so what has started off, what she entered into thinking was fun, was a boyfriend, was pleasant, turns out to be a nightmare. This, from people who will try to deny this phenomenon of abductions, forced conversions, they will say, well, the young girls are just wanting to have fun and it's their own fault. In the anti-trafficking world, we've long recognized that the lover boy phenomenon is actually a form of recruitment. It's been very well studied, very well identified, where young men will specifically target young women, will court them, will woo them, will win their trust. But this is all a very deceptive tactic. These are not relationships that they have entered into, certainly with good faith, and yet they have capitalized on the good faith and vulnerability of the young women.
It would be very important to stop this recruiting, to stop all of this happening. It would be very important to make all of this public. But of course, the families are reluctant to speak out because of the great shame, the women as well. How can we help to break this wall of silence? How do you approach the victims?
That's really a very important question and a very challenging question for a variety of reasons. Obviously, it's difficult to go into Egypt and conduct human rights investigations. We are well aware of the history of and the challenges faced by that. It's also particular, and that's an issue writ large. It's also quite challenging to identify families who are willing to speak to outsiders because of fear. And we had to promise anonymity to fathers, mothers, young women as a condition of their speaking to us. The lawyers, of course, are very happy, are very cooperative and willing to speak on the record and provide evidence that there are certain cases, but the details are hard. So, but there are, as I said, the BBC quite a few years ago did an excellent story on it. There are people who are willing to talk, an area that should be explored further by those who want to continue to get the word out about this and create more awareness. Are women who have been able to obtain asylum in different countries based on documented fear or already attempts of harm, of potential abduction. And these are areas where we as advocates could consider spending more focus, working with the Coptic community in the diaspora, the advocates, the survivors, the families, to understand and look for willingness to share stories of what had happened. Because of course these are the strongest voices.
So in your case, it was the Coptic community who helped you to reach out to the victims. Is that right?
Absolutely. I mentioned Nadia Ghali at the beginning of this. She is a Coptic Christian. She knew the community there. She was trusted and was able to help us contact the appropriate people and have the meetings that were necessary to have.
So it's very important for us to enforce this community, to help this community to speak out for the victims. The report of ACN states that the issue of abducted and forced married women is underreported in our media. This is surprising in view of our sensitivity to gender issues and woke generation. Where does this underreporting come from?
That's also an excellent question, and I've turned it over in my mind quite a bit. I think that one area is because it does involve religion, and certainly in Western feminism, religion and women's empowerment are not always the most harmonious or the most sympathetic partners for reasons that we all know. Also, there is a reluctance to judge, I use the word broadly, of course, the religious practices of another culture. So a premise would be, well, if this is a practice, then who are we to meddle in the religious practices of another culture? Who are we to interfere with the religious practices of the Islamic community? Where the denial is very strong and very quick, and the evidence is harder to come by.
So one of the bullet points of the report would be, it is a religious issue, and it's Islamists who force Christian women to marry and to leave their families.
This is what we have found, and others are finding this. You know, the ACN report, Hear Our Cries, is finding this also. There are, yes.
What concrete help can we provide from Europe and the USA?
I think that a high-level understanding and awareness of this in our different countries is very important, because this will help those Copts who are living outside of Egypt feel strengthened and encouraged that powerful governments do care and do matter. In terms of working within the country, we do need to make this an issue of conversation at high political levels, because that's always important. But we also need to let the people know, the Copts who are in these countries facing these particular challenges, that people care. The idea of encouragement and involvement from the outside has a psychological impact, which doesn't diminish everything that's happening, but hope comes from a variety of sources, and knowing that someone cares and someone is advocating on your behalf is helpful and important. And I also believe that this should be acknowledged as young Coptic women seek asylum in countries, that this is in fact a legitimate claim. I have been involved with different human rights lawyers here in the United States, helping to seek asylum for Coptic Christian women, where the petition has been granted because there now is emerging evidence that this is a real fear, a real threat, a real possibility.
The ASN report, Hear Her Cries, will reach out specifically to politicians as well. What can politicians do?
Politicians should do what they do well, which is to make sure that this is talked about. They should look at within Germany what are asylum provisions for Copts. What kind of, their governments are the German government, the American government is certainly limited by statute to concrete actions, but working to create a safe space for those who experience this kind of religious persecution is very important. We should make sure in the United States, I've worked with the Religious Freedom Report that's published by the U.S. Department of State in order to make sure that what is reported is accurate. There was a period of time when reporting on Coptic situations in Europe was frequently in Egypt, was frequently referred to as alleged instances of. And along with advocates, we applied considerable pressure to remove the term allegation or alleged instances, and in fact document these as legitimate and as verifiable. This has a ripple effect. The more the media recognizes that we're not talking about allegations, but that we are talking about legitimate interests, that carries more weight for subsequent reporting. Journalists will be more encouraged to take up a story where there is evidence as opposed to just public outcry.
And this as evidence is provided by the report Hear Her Cries by ACN. Thank you very much for your time and thank you for contributing to this report.
It's my honor, it's my great pleasure. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me.
Thank you. Liebe Zuschauerinnen und Zuschauer, vielen Dank für Ihr Interesse an diesem brandwichtigen Thema. Bitte helfen auch Sie, auf das Unrecht der Entführung und Zwangsverheiratung christlicher Frauen aufmerksam zu machen. Den Bericht Hört ihre Schreie können Sie sich kostenlos bei Kirche in Not bestellen und weitergeben. Die Kontaktdaten werden gleich eingeblendet. Danke fürs Zusehen und auf Wiedersehen.